I arrived at the family reunion with a heavy heart and a mind brimming with memories and secrets that had long been buried beneath the veneer of polished smiles and genteel conversation. The late afternoon sun cast its golden light across the driveway of my parents' estate, where rows of luxury vehicles gleamed like silent testaments to the ambitions and facades that defined our family. Every car, every carefully chosen detail of the setting, seemed to echo with unspoken expectations and the weight of our shared history. I stepped out of my car, feeling the cool whisper of a gentle breeze that mingled with my inner turmoil as I moved toward the grand entrance. Polite greetings were exchanged with relatives whose smiles were as much an obligation as they were a mask for inner disquiet, and each handshake and nod served as a subtle reminder of the carefully choreographed performance that these gatherings demanded. I sensed the undercurrent of tension, a mix of old resentments, unfulfilled promises, and the unyielding pressure to maintain an image of perfection that lay just beneath the surface of every conversation and every cordial laugh. Amid this orchestrated display of familial unity, I caught sight of Miranda standing in the arrival area, her presence commanding attention and radiating an air of superiority as she clung to the meticulously crafted persona she had honed over the years. Dressed immaculately, and with an expression that suggested both entitlement and control, she seemed every bit the star of this well-rehearsed production. Her sleek, pristine sedan, parked in a spot clearly reserved for her, underscored the deliberate cultivation of an image that left little room for vulnerability. Even as I silently observed her, a bittersweet irony stirred within me, a reminder of the admiration I once held for her determination, despite its capacity to smother genuine warmth and authenticity. As I wove through clusters of cousins, aunts, and uncles, the conversation flowed in cyclical patterns. Compliments on one another's achievements, nostalgic recollections of childhood summers, and subtle, almost imperceptible hints at underlying rivalries. Yet beneath every laugh and carefully measured word, I could feel the quiet pulse of hidden judgments and unspoken grievances. Every step I took seemed laden with both the beauty and the burden of our collective past, a past where every smile concealed a secret, every gesture hinted at rivalry, and every word bore the weight of expectation. In that charged atmosphere, as the warm glow of the setting sun bathed the estate in an almost surreal light, I became increasingly aware that our carefully constructed facades were beginning to show their delicate cracks. The grandeur of the estate and the elegance of the surroundings, with its sprawling lawns and meticulously manicured gardens, served as an ironic backdrop to the internal conflicts that churned within me. Each polished detail of the event, every shimmering car, every artfully arranged flower, spoke to a relentless pursuit of perfection that masked a more complicated and often painful reality. I found myself reflecting on the years that had led me to this day, on the triumphs and the disappointments that had defined my journey. Each step along the stone path to the entrance resonated with echoes of past gatherings, where laughter had mingled with silent despair and every cordial exchange had concealed a deeper undercurrent of envy and regret. The interplay of light and shadow on the marble floor of the foyer became a metaphor for the duality within me, an external calm that belied a turbulent inner landscape, a struggle between the weight of duty and the pull of my own desires. As I navigated this intricate dance of familial politics and unspoken rivalries, I felt a quiet yet undeniable stirring of resolve. No longer was I content to be merely a performer in a script dictated by tradition and the expectations of others. In that moment, I recognized that I was standing at the threshold of a profound personal transformation, a turning point where the roles I had long played were ready to be rewritten. Every whispered remark, every subtle glance exchanged among relatives, now took on a new significance as I envisioned a future defined not by the shallow markers of social status, but by authenticity and self-determination. The reunion, with all its elaborate trappings and orchestrated elegance, was suddenly transformed into a stage for my own internal revolution, a revolution that promised liberation from the constraints of pretense and the reclaiming of a truth long suppressed. In the quiet interplay of memory and anticipation, I realized that this day, marked by its familiar settings and carefully maintained appearances, would be the catalyst for the reawakening of my true self, a self determined to break free from the confines of conformity and to embrace a future built on the strength of my own convictions. Every moment, every seemingly insignificant detail, now resonated with the possibility of change, and as the last vestiges of daylight faded into the gentle embrace of twilight, I felt an unyielding certainty that my life was about to be forever transformed. Miranda's announcement shattered the carefully maintained veneer of the reunion like a clap of thunder on a clear day. We had gathered around an ornate dining table, its surface gleaming under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, when the atmosphere shifted. I sat there, feeling the weight of dozens of expectant eyes, each silently urging me to participate in this ritual of pretense. The clink of silverware and soft hum of polite conversation were abruptly interrupted when Miranda, with a self-assured smile that bordered on smug, stepped forward. Her voice, amplified by the authority she had long wielded with such precision, filled the room with words that struck me like physical blows. "I think it's time everyone knew the truth about Marcus," she declared, her tone deceptively light yet laced with an unmistakable edge of cruelty. In that instant, time seemed to slow, and I felt the crushing pressure of humiliation press against my chest as the reality of her words that accused me of financial ruin, sank in. The murmurs began almost immediately, an uneasy rustle of disbelief, punctuated by sharp intakes of breath and furtive glances exchanged between relatives. My heart pounded in my ears, not out of fear of what was being said, but from the profound betrayal that stung with every syllable. I could feel the heat rising on my cheeks, each beat of my pulse echoing the irony of a moment that was designed to cast me in the role of the defeated, the broken. But as her words reverberated off the walls, I found myself strangely detached from the scene, a silent witness to the unfolding drama that seemed to transform the familiar surroundings into a stage for my undoing. Miranda's eyes sparkled with a cold triumph as she continued, every word meticulously crafted to dismantle the carefully constructed image I had spent years upholding. Her voice, steady and deliberate, left no room for rebuttal, and it was clear to everyone present that she intended this to be the final, public confirmation of my supposed downfall. I could see my mother's eyes welling with tears of disbelief, my father's jaw clenching in silent disapproval, and Cousin Darren's sympathetic glances that spoke of long-held secrets and unspoken knowledge of the truth behind the facade. In that charged moment, the dinner table, a symbol of family unity and shared memories, became a tribunal where my very identity was on trial. The whispers that had rippled through the room grew louder, a tide of scandal that threatened to engulf me entirely. I sat motionless, each second stretching into an eternity as I absorbed the full impact of her words. Despite the public nature of the humiliation, a part of me marveled at the audacity of it all. Here was Miranda, boldly asserting control over the narrative, transforming what should have been a celebration of familial bonds into a stage for personal vendetta. Yet, beneath the shock and the sting of betrayal, a quiet resolve began to form, a determination that this moment, however painful, would not be my undoing but rather the spark that ignited a transformation within me. As the realization of her calculated cruelty set in, I became acutely aware of the micro-expressions of my relatives. The raised eyebrows, the slight shifts in posture, and the barely concealed smirks that betrayed their complicity in a family dynamic where appearances mattered more than truth. It was as if the room had collectively inhaled a deep, disapproving sigh, the weight of expectation and unspoken judgments now bearing down on Miranda as much as on me. I could almost feel the tension in the air tighten like a noose around her neck, a silent retribution for the years she had spent building her empire on the foundations of superficial perfection. Amidst the storm of whispers and the palpable discomfort, I was struck by the sheer theatricality of it all. Every word she uttered was a carefully aimed arrow, intended to wound not just my finances, but my very sense of self. And yet, as I sat there absorbing the onslaught, I felt a strange detachment, a clinical observation of my own suffering that, paradoxically, allowed me to see the situation with unsettling clarity. The humiliation was raw and visceral, a public unmasking of a man who had long concealed his vulnerabilities behind a facade of calm competence. And in that public arena of shame, I realized that Miranda had unwittingly provided the perfect canvas upon which I could paint a new future. A future where the narrative would no longer be dictated by the whispers of a judgmental family, but by the resolute actions of a man who refused to be defined by a single, humiliating moment. Each murmured remark from the onlookers, every stifled giggle or gasped exclamation, resonated within me as both a reminder of my fall and a call to rise again. As her final words echoed in the charged silence that followed, I felt a cold clarity seep into my bones. This was not the end of my story, but the beginning of a calculated, deliberate reclamation of my life. A silent promise to myself that I would transform this moment of public debasement into the fuel for a resurgence of strength and determination. Even as the room buzzed with scandal and the air was thick with the remnants of shattered illusions, I resolved to let this humiliation serve as a catalyst for change. In that painful, unforgettable moment, I realized that true power lies not in the cruel judgments of others, but in the quiet, unyielding resolve to rise above them and reclaim one's narrative. And so, with every mocking glance and every whispered comment that now permeated the room, I began to nurture the embers of a plan that would ensure that this public disgrace was only the first step towards a future defined not by the failures of the past, but by the unassailable strength of a man who had finally learned to embrace his truth. Even as Miranda's venomous words continued to reverberate in the dining hall, an inner calm and a fierce satisfaction began to kindle within me, a satisfaction born of a secret, calculated act of defiance that had taken shape in the quiet hours of that very morning. I recalled with vivid clarity the early light of dawn when, long before the first whispers of scandal had reached my ears, I had risen with a singular, unyielding purpose. In the stillness of the pre-dawn hours, while the world outside lay hushed and expectant, I found myself in a modest, yet impeccably appointed office on the edge of the financial district. The sterile hum of fluorescent lights contrasted sharply with the warmth of my determination as I sat before a polished desk strewn with contracts and legal documents. It was there, with a pen poised like a sword and a heart steeled against the looming specter of humiliation, that I executed the transaction that would irrevocably alter the balance of power between Miranda and me. With deliberate calm, I signed the documents confirming the purchase of a magnificent vacation home, a property that was nothing less than the physical embodiment of Miranda's most coveted dream. It was a home with sunlit terraces, expansive windows framing breathtaking ocean vistas, and a private beach that whispered promises of indulgence and escape. For years, Miranda had nurtured this vision, an unattainable fantasy that she clung to as a symbol of status and perfection. Yet, with the quiet stroke of my pen in that dim, early morning light, I had seized that dream for myself, transforming it into a potent instrument of retribution. Every nuance of that moment is etched indelibly in my memory. The cool, crisp paper beneath my fingertips, the reassuring murmur of the real estate agent who, unbeknownst to her, had facilitated the irony of my victory, and the soft, almost imperceptible clink of the register signaling a transaction that was far more than a mere financial maneuver. It was the spark of revenge, a meticulously kindled flame of defiance that now burned steadily within me. The weight of that morning's deed was a constant, silent reminder that even as Miranda attempted to use public shame to undermine me, I had already set the stage for a dramatic reversal. Back at the reunion, amidst the orchestrated chaos of polished conversation and veiled glances, the memory of that clandestine transaction pulsed in my veins with an intensity that eclipsed the sting of her words. As I listened to her speak, each syllable dripping with condescension and cruelty, I could not help but smile inwardly, knowing that while she was busy broadcasting my supposed downfall, I had claimed a victory that she could neither foresee nor undo. It was a delicious irony. The very dream house she had coveted was now mine, a silent, tangible testament to the fact that she had underestimated my resolve. In that private triumph, I discovered the transformative power of revenge, not as an impulsive outburst of anger, but as a deliberate, calculated act of self-liberation. The spark of revenge that had ignited in those quiet moments of dawn was no fleeting whim. It was a carefully orchestrated strategy, a subtle yet potent reclamation of control that promised to upend the narrative she had so arrogantly tried to script. As the family gathered around, embroiled in the theatrics of scandal and disbelief, my mind remained anchored in that secret victory. I could almost taste the thrill of that decisive moment every time I felt the cold sting of public humiliation, each echo of her voice serving only to reinforce my newfound resolve. It was as though, in the silent sanctuary of the early morning, I had transformed my deepest wounds into the very building blocks of a future defined by autonomy and strength. The purchase of that vacation home was not merely a financial transaction. It was the definitive spark that set into motion a chain of events destined to overturn the power dynamics of our relationship. It was a silent promise to myself that I would never again be reduced to the role of a helpless victim, that every slight, every calculated barb hurled in my direction would be met with a measured, deliberate response. As I sat among the murmurs and shocked expressions in the grand dining hall, the secret of that morning glowed within me like an inner sun, dispelling the shadows cast by Miranda's betrayal. I knew then that the humiliation I was enduring was but a prelude to a larger, more transformative narrative, a narrative in which I would no longer be defined by the cruelty of another, but by the relentless, unwavering pursuit of my own truth. In that moment, with the spark of revenge ignited in the solitude of dawn and fanned into a steady blaze by the indignities of the day, I embraced the profound realization that my destiny was mine to shape. The memory of that decisive act, of reclaiming what had been hers all along, would fuel every subsequent step I took, guiding me toward a future where my actions, not her words, would dictate the course of my life. I stepped away from the charged atmosphere of the dining hall and into the cool embrace of the patio, my mind a turbulent mixture of raw indignation and an emerging, resolute clarity. The weight of every cutting word and every demeaning glance I had endured earlier still clung to me like an unwanted shroud, yet as I walked away from the tumultuous center of the reunion, I felt that burden beginning to lift. In the fading light of the evening, with shadows dancing softly across the manicured lawn, I paused and allowed myself a moment of stillness, a moment to truly confront the raw, unfiltered emotions swirling within me. I could almost hear the echoes of Miranda's cruel declarations reverberating in the distance, yet in that very moment of solitude, a thought crystallized with the clarity of a well-honed plan. I would no longer allow my life to be dictated by public humiliation or by the calculated cruelty of someone I once trusted. The cool air against my skin seemed to invigorate me, urging me to seize this decisive juncture with both caution and unyielding determination. My heart pounded steadily as I reached for my phone, a tool that had, until now, remained an unassuming accessory to my daily life, but which now, in this charged moment, transformed into the instrument of my liberation. I navigated the contacts list with deliberate precision, selecting the name of my lawyer as if dialing into the very mechanism of my future autonomy. The phone vibrated lightly in my hand, and I cradled it close as if it contained within it the key to rewriting the narrative that Miranda had so arrogantly tried to impose upon me. Each second that passed on that silent patio felt laden with the gravity of the decision I was about to make. A decision that was no longer about revenge in the impulsive, destructive sense, but rather about reclaiming my personal sovereignty. I could almost see the outline of the future unfolding before my eyes, a future where my worth was no longer measured by the shallow metrics of public opinion, but by the inner strength and clarity of purpose I was now embracing. With a steady breath, I pressed the call button, and the phone rang in a deliberate cadence, each ring a resounding affirmation of the choice I had made. As the call connected, I spoke with a voice that betrayed none of the internal storm that had raged mere moments before. "Draft my divorce papers immediately," I said, each word carefully enunciated, imbued with the calm authority of a man who was finally taking back control. Even as I issued that command, I could sense the shifting dynamics of the reunion. The murmurs in the hall, the subtle turning of heads, and the quiet, dawning realization among those who had witnessed my public humiliation that the narrative was changing. I listened to the lawyer's calm confirmation on the other end of the line, the measured tone reinforcing that the irreversible act I was committing was not born solely of despair, but from a calculated, deliberate resolve. In that moment, I felt as if every past disappointment, every bitter memory of a life dictated by superficial appearances, was being purged from my soul. I had long carried the weight of living up to expectations not my own, and now, with a single, decisive act, I was shedding the old skin of my identity. The realization was as liberating as it was daunting. I was, in that very moment, standing at the threshold of an entirely new chapter of my life, one that would be defined not by the scars of humiliation, but by the strength of every decision I made moving forward. The breeze whispered around me, and I allowed myself to close my eyes briefly, feeling the chill of the night and the warmth of a newfound determination merging into a single, potent sensation. I began to walk back towards the grand entrance, each step deliberate and measured, as if marking the rhythm of my new heartbeat. A heartbeat that now pulsed with the promise of autonomy and the anticipation of rebuilding on my own terms. In that walk, I was not merely leaving behind the remnants of a shared past with Miranda. I was also stepping into a realm where my decisions were mine alone, free from the judgment and manipulation of those who had once defined me. I could almost feel the weight of each door and lock in my mind, each symbol of the past that I was now ready to discard. And with every step, I silently promised myself that this moment, this decisive act of calling my lawyer, of asserting my right to reclaim my life, was the first of many that would pave the way for a future unburdened by the chains of humiliation and self-doubt. I knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges and perhaps lingering echoes of past betrayals, but the clarity of my purpose in that quiet, starlit moment left no room for second-guessing. The decision was irreversible, a point of no return that would transform the narrative from one of defeat to one of empowerment. As I re-entered the building, each step resonated with a newfound confidence that I had long thought lost. My internal dialogue was no longer a cacophony of doubts and insecurities. It had been replaced by a resolute voice, affirming that I was now the sole author of my destiny. The moment of decision had come, and with it, the promise of a future built on the strength of my own convictions. A future where every challenge would be met with the unwavering resolve of a man who had finally chosen to stand tall in the face of adversity. Standing on the back porch, I felt the cool evening air wrap around me, as if it were the first true breath of freedom I'd taken in years. The murmurs and confused chatter from the reunion inside had begun to ebb into a low, uncertain hum, but here on the porch, the world was still, and I could almost hear the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat, each thump a silent affirmation of the resolve surging through me. I looked out over the manicured lawn and the softly lit house, the elegant structure now transformed in my mind into a symbol of the life I was finally ready to reclaim. With the weight of humiliation still lingering like a dark cloud, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, its screen glowing faintly in the twilight. The device, which had long been an accessory in my day-to-day existence, now pulsed with a significance that went far beyond its digital functions. As I scrolled through the contact list, my eyes locked onto the name that represented a lifeline to my new future. A name that, to Miranda, had always been an inconvenient reminder of legalities and formalities, but to me, now symbolized the severing of the final, suffocating ties of our shared past. I tapped the contact with deliberate calm, feeling each second of anticipation stretch out as the call connected. The phone vibrated softly in my hand, its resonance blending with the distant, indistinct clamor of the reunion, creating a backdrop that underscored the gravity of the moment. With a steady, measured tone that belied the swirling storm of emotions inside me, I spoke clearly, my words carrying over the speakerphone so that every family member, even those inside, could hear the decisive command I was about to issue. "Draft my divorce papers immediately," I said, my voice resonating with an unwavering firmness that left no room for misinterpretation. The words echoed in the cool night air, each syllable a carefully measured blow against the remnants of a life defined by subservience and humiliation. As the command left my lips, I could almost see the ripple of shock traveling through the gathering, a silent acknowledgement that the dynamics of power were shifting irrevocably. The lawyer's voice, calm and efficient, came through next, a series of curt confirmations that punctuated the finality of my decision. Every time I heard that measured tone, it served as a reminder that my life was no longer tethered to the carefully constructed image Miranda had so obsessively maintained. Instead, I was now steering my own course, empowered by a clarity that had been forged in the crucible of betrayal. Standing there, I listened intently as my lawyer recounted the next steps in a businesslike cadence, each instruction reinforcing the irreversible nature of this turning point. The conversation was not a heated debate, but rather a series of crisp, clear directives that communicated both urgency and a reassuring professionalism. With every word that the lawyer spoke over the speakerphone, the walls of my former life seemed to crumble a little more, replaced by the solid, unyielding foundation of self-determination that I had begun to construct. The sound of my own voice, now amplified for all to hear, mingled with the lawyer's responses, creating an unexpected symphony, a composition of defiance and liberation that reverberated through the open space of the porch and seeped into the very fabric of the gathering inside. I could almost sense the shock and disbelief radiating outward, from the whispered conversations among the relatives to the furtive glances exchanged between those who had once seen me as a subordinate player in a larger, prescribed narrative. But in that moment, I no longer cared about the opinions of those who thrived on pretense. My focus was entirely inward, on the clarity that comes from making a decision that honors one's true self, even when it burns the bridges of the past. I took a measured breath, feeling the slight tremor of residual adrenaline and the steadying calm of resolve blend into one powerful sensation. The lawyer confirmed that the documents would be sent over immediately, and with that final confirmation, a silent contract was sealed. A contract that marked the end of an era defined by compromise and the beginning of a new chapter, one that I would write on my own terms. The sound of the lawyer's confirmation lingered in the cool night air, merging with the rustle of leaves and the soft hum of distant conversations, creating a moment that was at once both deeply personal and startlingly public. As I ended the call, the phone falling silent in my hand, I felt a profound sense of liberation wash over me. The act of placing that call, of letting every ear within the vicinity hear my unwavering declaration, was not just a legal formality. It was a ritual of rebirth, an audible severance from the past that had long weighed me down. I stood there for a few long moments, the cool air soothing my skin, the silence of the night a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded earlier. Every fiber of my being resonated with the realization that I had just taken the first irreversible step toward a future defined by autonomy, dignity, and the unassailable truth of my own worth. With the echo of that decisive command still reverberating softly in my ears, I stepped off the porch, leaving behind the remnants of a life that was no longer mine, and moved forward into a destiny that I would now forge with every deliberate, empowered step. As I re-entered the grand hall, the charged atmosphere shifted into an almost unbearable silence, punctuated by a medley of gasps, murmurs, and disbelieving stares. Every eye in the room fixed on me, and the charged energy that had built up over the past hour now exploded into a chaotic chorus of shock and indignation. I felt as though I were standing on a stage, exposed and vulnerable, yet somehow shielded by the resolute certainty of my own actions. The fallout of my public declaration rippled outward, touching each corner of the room and each person present. I saw my mother's eyes glistening with sorrow and worry as she exchanged looks with my father, whose face was etched with a mixture of disbelief and quiet resignation. Their silent communication conveyed a shared pain over the disintegration of a family ideal they had clung to for so long. In one corner, Cousin Darren's gaze was heavy with both sympathy and a hint of vindication, a silent acknowledgement that the carefully constructed facades were beginning to crumble. The conversation, which had previously flowed with the superficial warmth of reunion, now faltered into staccato fragments of shock, incredulous whispers, and a palpable tension that seemed to bind everyone together in a moment of collective realization. I could almost feel the weight of every judgmental glance and every unspoken accusation. The room, once filled with the buoyant sounds of laughter and casual chatter, had become a courtroom where every family member silently cast their verdict. Miranda's face was the most arresting of all, a canvas of emotions ranging from stark disbelief to a dawning horror as she attempted to regain control of the narrative. Her previously unassailable mask of superiority had faltered, revealing the raw vulnerability beneath. I watched as she struggled for words that might restore her dignity, but her voice was reduced to a series of halting, breathless murmurs that only deepened the sense of inevitability about the reversal of our power dynamics. The room itself seemed to pulse with the intensity of the moment. Each whispered comment and every furtive look was a tangible reminder of the profound shift that had taken place. I could hear snippets of conversation, accusations, expressions of shock, even a few murmured expletives, and yet, amid the cacophony, there emerged a strange, quiet clarity within me. Every reaction, every ripple of dismay, affirmed that the carefully constructed world Miranda had built was collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. My internal dialogue was a steady undercurrent of resolve. Each remark I heard, whether in disapproving tones or sympathetic whispers, only strengthened my determination. I began to appreciate the irony of it all, how the very announcement that was meant to degrade me had, in effect, exposed the hypocrisy and fragility of the image Miranda had so painstakingly curated. The more the family reacted, the more I felt liberated, as if their shock was inadvertently bolstering the certainty that I was finally reclaiming my narrative. I could sense the tension stretching taut between the assembled relatives, each trying to process the dissonance between the image of the man they thought they knew and the reality that was unfolding before their eyes. In that charged moment, the reunion transformed into an arena where hidden resentments and long-standing secrets surfaced, unbidden and raw. I observed a mixture of emotions playing across the faces around me. Some expressed genuine concern for what had just transpired, others wore expressions of schadenfreude, and still others appeared paralyzed by the unexpected upheaval of a familiar order. Every detail, the way a distant relative's hand trembled as it reached for a glass of wine, the furtive glances exchanged between family members, the audible clearing of throats that punctuated the uneasy silence, etched itself into my memory as evidence of a collective reckoning. I found myself silently questioning the nature of our shared ties, realizing that beneath the veneer of familial loyalty lay a complex web of expectations and unspoken grievances that had finally been laid bare. The fallout was not merely an external eruption. It was an internal catharsis, a shattering of the illusions that had long defined both my personal identity and our family's public image. With each passing moment, the room's energy shifted from raw shock to a tentative, unspoken understanding that the old order was irreparably altered. I noticed a few relatives quietly nodding, their eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and sorrow, as if they too had been waiting for this inevitable unraveling of pretense. In that transformative instant, I recognized that the fallout was not solely about the scandal of my personal humiliation. It was about the unmasking of truths that had been suppressed for too long. The air was thick with the scent of change, the sound of whispered exclamations intermingling with the heavy silence of those coming to terms with a new reality. I felt a deep, almost visceral satisfaction in knowing that the very act meant to disgrace me had instead initiated a process of liberation for us all, stripping away the layers of deception and forcing us to confront what lay beneath. Amid the storm of reactions, I stood tall, absorbing every ripple of emotion as a reminder of the decisive moment I had forged. This was not a fleeting moment of personal vindication. It was a pivotal juncture in the transformation of my life, a turning point that promised to redefine not only my future, but also the collective narrative of our family. In that silent, suspended tableau, I felt the heavy chains of expectation and judgment begin to fall away, replaced by an emerging clarity of purpose and a determination to rebuild on my own terms. The fallout, with all its raw energy and unpredictable consequences, had irrevocably altered the course of our shared story, marking the end of a bygone era and the uncertain, yet hopeful, beginning of a new chapter defined by truth, autonomy, and the unassailable strength of personal conviction. I stepped away from the chaos of the grand hall with a purposeful stride, my decision resonating in every measured footfall as I left behind a family gathering that had become a stage for bitter theatrics and public shame. The energy inside, a volatile mix of shock and whispered judgments, clung to me like a dark fog even as I ventured out into the cool, liberating embrace of the night. Outside, the silence was palpable, a striking contrast to the cacophony of disapproval and disbelief that I had just left behind. The crisp air on my face and the gentle murmur of distant conversations filled my ears, each step affirming that I was no longer a captive to the venomous dynamics that had governed my life for far too long. I could feel the lingering weight of humiliation slowly lifting, replaced by a burgeoning resolve to reclaim every ounce of my dignity and autonomy. With the cool night as my silent witness, I made my way toward my car, my thoughts already racing ahead to the next decisive act that would mark the true severance from a past riddled with deceit and compromise. Every step was deliberate, an echo of my newfound determination to walk a path solely defined by my own terms. Once in the privacy of my car, I allowed myself a brief moment of introspection. The dark windows offered a glimpse into a life that I had long struggled to control. A life where every door had once symbolized an inescapable link to a chapter filled with humiliation and relentless expectations. Now, as I drove away from the scene of my public undoing, the road ahead shimmered with the promise of renewal and self-determination. I parked a few blocks away, far enough from the overwhelming memories of the reunion, and headed toward the house that had become a tomb of old secrets. The silence of the suburban night was broken only by the soft hum of my tires on the pavement and the steady rhythm of my heartbeat, a sound that, in that moment, spoke of liberation rather than defeat. Arriving at what had once been our shared home, I paused before the imposing front door, its once familiar facade now a stark reminder of a life dictated by compromise and bitter betrayal. With a firm resolve that surged within me, I retrieved the spare key from my pocket and stepped inside, each step echoing in the empty halls as if marking the final farewell to a past I was determined to leave behind. The interior, once filled with memories of laughter and shared dreams, now resonated with a new purpose, each room a canvas upon which I would paint the story of my rebirth. Without hesitation, I set to work on the symbolic task that would cement this transformation. I moved purposefully from room to room, replacing the old locks with new ones, each metallic click a resonant declaration of autonomy. The act was as much a practical measure as it was a ritual of empowerment, a tangible way to sever the lingering ties that had so long bound me to a history of subjugation and humiliation. With every turn of the key and every lock that clicked securely into place, I felt the chains of the past shatter, replaced by the solid, reassuring promise of a future built on my own terms. The old locks, symbols of shared spaces and compromised lives, were now relics of a bygone era, a past that I was determined to outgrow. I lingered in the doorway of what had once been our living room, my hand resting on the new lock as I took a long, deep breath. The cool metal under my fingertips was a reminder that change, though sometimes harsh and unyielding, was both possible and necessary. In that quiet moment of reflection, I allowed myself to imagine the countless possibilities that lay ahead, a life unburdened by the weight of expectations and the toxic dynamics of the past. I envisioned a future where each sunrise would greet me not as a reminder of old regrets, but as a fresh start brimming with promise and potential. The sound of the new locks clicking into place was like a heartbeat, steady and resolute, echoing the rhythm of a man who had finally reclaimed his destiny. I moved from room to room, ensuring every door and window was secure, each act of fortification a step toward the liberation of my soul. With the final lock in place, I stood in the quiet solitude of the hallway, the soft hum of the night outside merging with the steady pulse of my heart, and felt a profound sense of authority wash over me. I was no longer defined by the cruelty of others or the ghosts of past betrayals. Instead, I was the master of my own space, the architect of a future untainted by the illusions and false promises that had once imprisoned me. Every sound, the distant murmur of traffic, the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, served as a quiet celebration of my newfound freedom. I realized then that this act of changing the locks was not merely about securing a building. It was about reclaiming every part of my life that had been compromised by the failures and betrayals of the past. As I stepped back outside, the night sky stretched endlessly above me, dotted with stars that glistened like beacons of hope and renewal. The cool air, once a harbinger of isolation, now felt invigorating, each breath a silent pledge to the future I was determined to create. In that moment, standing in the quiet darkness with the soft glow of streetlights guiding my way, I embraced the authority that came with every decision I had made. I was stepping into a new era, a life defined not by the scars of humiliation, but by the strength to transform them into milestones of personal triumph. The path ahead was uncertain, yet every step I took was imbued with the resolute knowledge that I alone held the power to shape my destiny. With the locks changed and the old life securely behind me, I walked away from that house with a heart unburdened and a spirit ready to soar into a future where every moment was mine to command. In the weeks that followed that fateful night, I found myself at the threshold of an entirely new existence, one built not on the fragile illusions of the past, but on the sturdy bricks of self-reliance and calculated reinvention. Every morning, as the soft light of dawn crept through my window, I awoke to a world that seemed full of potential. I began to chart a new course for my future, one where every financial decision, every personal goal, was a deliberate step away from the humiliation and betrayal that had defined so many of my yesterdays. I sat at my desk each morning, a steaming mug of coffee in hand, and meticulously reviewed my investments and assets. The spreadsheets that once signified my financial ruin had transformed into blueprints for rebuilding my life. Each line of numbers was no longer a reminder of a public downfall, but a stepping stone towards a horizon filled with promise. I reached out to trusted advisors, old friends, and seasoned professionals who had always believed in my potential, even when others doubted it. Their guidance was a lifeline, a steady hand on my shoulder as I navigated the turbulent waters of recovery. With every meeting, every conversation, I began to reconstruct the foundation of my financial future. I invested in ventures that resonated with my newfound vision, projects that valued integrity and ingenuity over superficial show. There was a sense of empowerment in making choices that were mine alone, free from the manipulations of those who had once dictated my worth. Alongside these practical steps, I embarked on a personal journey of introspection and renewal. I took long walks along quiet streets at night, the crisp air mingling with the soft hum of distant city life, each step affirming that I was no longer bound by the ghosts of past failures. In these solitary moments, I reflected on the lessons that the betrayal and public humiliation had imparted. I realized that the pain I had endured was not an end, but a catalyst for transformation, a crucible in which the raw material of my character was refined into something resilient and unyielding. I began to journal my thoughts and plans, writing long, deliberate entries that charted the evolution of my inner life. In those pages, I found clarity and purpose. I documented every setback and every small victory, understanding that each was integral to the mosaic of my new self. My evenings became a time for quiet celebration of progress. I would sit on the balcony of my modest new apartment, the one I had chosen with care as a symbol of my independence, and watch the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. In that glow, I saw not the remnants of a life overshadowed by shame, but the promise of fresh beginnings. I reached out to those who had remained loyal throughout my darkest hours, reconnecting with friends and even some estranged family members. Our conversations were raw and honest, a departure from the carefully curated pleasantries of the past. They were moments of genuine human connection, where vulnerability was met with empathy and support rather than judgment. Each interaction reinforced my belief that rebuilding was not solely about financial recovery, but about reclaiming every facet of my life, my spirit, my relationships, and my sense of identity. I even began to explore new ventures, small projects that allowed me to channel my creative energy into something tangible. I volunteered my time to help local community initiatives, offering a hand where I could make a difference, and in doing so, I discovered that true strength lay in the capacity to contribute positively to the lives of others. With every challenge I faced in this process of reinvention, I became more attuned to the quiet power that comes from forging a path based on one's own terms. The humiliation I had once endured had become a distant echo, replaced by the steady beat of a heart that knew its own worth. I learned to celebrate the small victories, the successful closure of a deal, the heartfelt gratitude of a friend, the simple pleasure of a peaceful evening spent in reflection. These moments, each seemingly insignificant on their own, coalesced into a robust new foundation upon which I began to build a future defined by resilience and authenticity. As I continued down this road, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the harsh lessons that had set me on this journey. They had stripped away the inessential, leaving behind a core that was unyielding and true. Every calculated move, every deliberate choice, was now imbued with a purpose that extended beyond mere survival. It was a declaration that I was the master of my destiny, the architect of my own revival. In that unfolding narrative of rebuilding my life, I found not just solace but a quiet, powerful joy. A joy born from the knowledge that every new day was an opportunity to write a story of triumph over the forces that had once sought to break me.